Welcome back to In the Can. What a day we're having here at Park City Television. We just had Morgan Spurlock on, and now we're going to be talking with acclaimed director James Marsh about his film Shadow Dancer. So thank you for coming in.
Pleasure.
Particularly so early in the morning.
Indeed.
Hopefully we can just have a nice little conversation, not too high pressured.
Nothing too intellectual.
Right. Tonight's the big night anyway, so you got to save your energy for it.
Tonight, exactly.
Yeah. Your premieres tonight of the film Shadow Dancer, and you were here last year. Jeff got to talk with you about your documentary film Project Nim, which was fantastic. Everyone was talking about that last year, and you're here this year in the premieres category.
Yes, it's a narrative feature film.
Right.
I've come this year to Sundance, and it's set in Northern Ireland around the time of the peace process in the early 90s. So it's a kind of unusual perspective of that particular conflict. And it's a very basic premise of the film is that a young IRA volunteer, as they're called, goes to London, is caught red-handed on a mission, and British Secret Service then turn her into a mole, and she has to spy on her own family, which is an extraordinary, interesting, dramatic idea to pursue in a film.
Yeah, so it's set, and you talk a lot about the history of Northern Ireland and that conflict there, but it's a very personal story.
It really isn't about the conflict, it's not about politics, it's actually a human drama in these very unusual circumstances in Northern Ireland at that time. It has something in, I guess, in common with that film, The Lives of Others, that was set in East Germany. It has a kind of, you know, those circumstances are very unusual, but within that you've got real people making very, very difficult and tough choices.
Right. So this is an adaptation, correct?
It's from a novel, and the novelist then wrote the screenplay, Tom Bradley.
Okay. So is this the first time you've done an adaptation?
I actually did an adaptation of a film called Red Riding, which was based on a quartet of novels that was made for British television, and IFC picked it up and showed it in the US. So it's my second adaptation, in fact.
And how is it different to do an adaptation versus an original screenplay that maybe you write or something like
I've
that?
done that too. I made a film called The King, which I co-wrote.
So how is that different?
That's an interesting question. I think that your objectives are basically the same. You're trying to tell the story as well as you can. When you've written a piece, you tend to get closer to it much more quickly, and you begin to direct it much more early on in the process. When you're writing, you're kind of writing for yourself as a director, whereas on an adapted screenplay or a screenplay that you're given, you're trying to find your personal take on it. That's the first thing you do. And then once you find your personal take, you get obsessed with it in the same way you're obsessed with your own writing. So every film is a sort of obsessive quest for me, and this has been the same.
So when you do an adaptation, do you feel like you have the freedom to impart your perspective of how the story unfolds, or do you feel like you have a responsibility to the original writer to also have his vision be very well seen in the movie?
Well, I think for me to direct the film, I have to find a very strong personal angle on it, and I tend to shape screenplays when I get them accordingly. So I would work on a screenplay and work with the writer and sort of develop it a bit, and this was true of this particular film. That said, you want to respect the thing you responded to, the thing originally has given you the impulse to make the film, but you have to make them your own and do it quite boldly and quite confidently. You can't submit yourself to every word of the screenplay. When you get your actors around, you begin to shape things with them too, and that's a big collaboration on a feature, as you work with actors and you begin to improvise a little bit and change things around a bit, respecting, I think, the spirit of what you've been given to work with, but you have to make them your own, there's no question about that.
Speaking of the actors, you've got a great cast in this film.
We certainly do.
Let's talk about them for a moment.
Well, we have Andrea Riseborough, who plays our protagonist, the young single mother who's caught and turned and made to then betray her own ideals and her own family. Clive Owen plays the MI5 officer, the British Secret Service officer, who recruits her. They end up having a very awkward and uncomfortable relationship, but they begin to come closer together because there are bigger and uglier forces at work that the Clive Owen's character begins to discover, that he's also being manipulated by people higher up in the power structure. It's a very twisty kind of film.
Yeah.
We have also a great supporting cast of Irish actors. Aidan Gillen's in the film from The Wire, Donald Gleeson, and David Wilmot and Breach Brennan. So we have a great Irish ensemble cast around our two English actors.
Well, let's take a quick look at your film Shadow Dancer. So take a quick look, and we'll be we'll follow up with what we're going to see. Do you know what we're going to see in this
I don't actually know, so I'm excited to find out.
So we'll take a look at it, and then we'll talk about it when we come back. That was a quick look at the highly anticipated film Shadow Dancer, and we're speaking with James Marsh, the director, about that film. So that clip showed, go ahead.
That was just the immediate aftermath of Clive Owen's character persuading and coercing and bullying Andrea's character to agree to do this unspeakable, disloyal act of treachery to her own family, i.e. go back to Belfast, listen, eavesdrop on your brothers and your mother, tell us what's going on. So that's the beginning of their relationship. You can see how awkward it is in the car. And there's another, as I said, more ugly conspiracy that begins to emerge around those characters. So you're seeing this the immediate aftermath of him getting her on the hook, essentially.
So being such an acclaimed director, I would assume that you have a lot of projects that you see that you could take on. How do you make the decision on where you're going to focus your energy
well, you have to
what
evaluate
projects you're going to do?
Something that you're going to spend a lot of time with. You're going to spend maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years on a project, whether it's a documentary or a feature film. And so you have to know that there's a sort of layer of ideas that you can discover in a project and that will preoccupy you and obsess you, essentially, for a good deal of time. I'm still thinking about Project Nim now, even though I finished that film over a year ago. It's still, the ideas in that film are very unsettling and untidy. And so you tend to look for things, you don't quite know how to do them, but you can't stop yourself doing them. And if you knew how to do it, I'd intend not to do films that I know how to do, because that feels a little bit too easy. I'd take on films that I'm daunted by and unsure about, and then the act of making them is the way in which you get to the bottom of your interest, essentially.
So at the end of your career, when you look back and you have this mix of documentaries and dramatics, will there be a common theme to your work that will be your stamp, perhaps, on the filmmaking industry?
I'll leave that for other people to decide. If they care to. I don't suppose they will. No, I think I choose subjects that are very different. That's the reason I choose them. There's not really a common theme amongst the subjects I've chosen. I guess the way I approach a film stylistically can be quite, similar. But no, I tend to go to very different ideas every time.
Yeah,
and that
because
seems
it's
healthy.
very different between Project Nim and Shadow Dancer.
Primate behaviour, just generally could be one description of my work.
There you go.
That's true of many other filmmakers too.
Primate behaviour, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming in. Again, it's showing tonight.
Yes, it's the premiere tonight.
So good luck.
Thank you.
Have a nice, relaxing day leading into it, and we appreciate you taking the time out this morning to be here.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more in the can right after this.